my notes with a lot of madman jokes because you started in the marketing and advertising kind of community. What were a few things that you learned from the marketing world that college didn't necessarily teach you about the marketing industry?
There's a lot college doesn't teach you about the marketing industry. I think that's fairly consistent with probably almost every profession, right? You learn the mechanics of things, but it's different when you get out in the real world. I suppose what marketing taught you that is applicable regardless of what industry you go in is trying to figure out what you're doing that's different from your competition and how do you separate yourself. I'm fond of saying I actually went to 3 dark sides. So I started in the agency side, like Mad Men. That's
Darth Vader land, 3 dark sides.
And listen, when you're in advertising, the dark side of advertising is marketing. You think you're the purist, right? You're the brand guy. You're talking about, image and pictures, and the marketing guys go screw it up. And then I went to the marketing side, and the dark side of marketing is sales. A sales guy's just selling anything, right? Well, he doesn't care about being different. He just, whatever the buck is. And then I went into sales, and so I've gone 3 paths down.
Right. So we have some people here that are from the marketing industry. And I read in your bio that you, within your marketing firm, you worked with clients that were above $25 million.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to the audience and people in sales here of how do you gauge those people? How do you find those companies that are bigger than $25 million?
Probably no different than you would find any other company, honestly. You just got to find the circles they play in, right? And what that matters to them. Not to sort of route around your question a little, but I'm not sure it's as much about the revenue as it is about what your sales price is into the market and how high a level are you selling into. If you're selling a reasonable price to a mid-level manager and that's who the buyer is and that's what matters, then that's they're easier to find. You start selling 6 and 7 figure deals and you're going up to the C-level for the decisions. Those are a lot harder to get to. And then you start navigating this whole influencer to buyer to gatekeeper, and you're just managing all those different personalities, people who are what they care about. And I suppose that's probably the biggest difference that I've noticed. The more you go into an enterprise sell and the more you start trying to attack C-level executives, that the challenge is first reaching them so that they can actually listen and get a message that's going to penetrate everything, because they get so much noise at that level. And so you have to use every sort of angle you can. Find them at a trade show, go through the VP, find the influencer. That used to be popular back in old days marketing, not what Jack's doing now, and that's a whole different world. But you start to play into, the expensive gifts and sending them, real high-end direct mail pieces, and that's
like bottling bourbon.
I mean, it might have been bribing with bourbon. That's fine. That's a whole nother, cult that's happened, right? But I think you just got to route back to who is your buyer, who's the message, how do you break through that, and there's no one way to do it. Every industry is slightly different. That's been probably the most unique thing. When I was starting, my wife and I founded Saylent first, and we were selling it to financial services executives, banks and credit unions. And we typically lived in sort of the payment vertical to start. And so you'd sell into almost a VP level or an SVP, because everybody in a bank's a VP, if you haven't ever noticed that.
That explains all the BMWs in Charlotte.
They have AVPs, assistant VPs, AVPs, VPs, SVPs, whatever. Everybody's a VP. But, I think it's really, really important, just back to your point, it's really important to sort of figure out how you craft that message and how you get through all the noise. I mean, that's ultimately the thing. And you'll find them at trade shows, you'll find them through email, you'll find them through relationship building. I mean, that's generally speaking how it works.
Yeah. So I read again that you were number 5 at one of your friends' startups. Do you think being that early in a startup maybe sparked an interest in you being an entrepreneur yourself? And if you're number 5, you're not far from, the very, very start. So do you think that experience led you to become an entrepreneur?
Not that experience. I had always felt like I was going to start a company. I thought I was going to start an ad agency. My father owned an ad agency, and so I grew up in that world. And I just thought, oh, well, that's what we do, right? We start through the path and we do this. And my wife will tell you I'm a reasonably confident individual at times. She probably wouldn't phrase it as nicely as I just phrased it.
For eye rolls.
So I always thought I was going to do it. I never thought I'd get into software, and I never thought I would end up in banking, ever. I don't know why. I've got tread marks, so it's not any fun. But I think the one credit I think I would give myself is that I think I was smart enough to just let the career path happen, and I tried to do something at every stop that I was at. I was employee number 5 at actually David Friend, who's a serial entrepreneur up in Boston. He started.
Friend's name was Friend?
No, this is a different.
Oh.
I was 5 at 2. This is an interesting dynamic. So David Friend started a bunch of companies. Probably his most successful was Carbonite, if anybody remembers that data storage company. This was not Carbonite. It was the one before Carbonite. It was in the .com. We raised $75 million. I came on as the director of marketing in Boston. And I saw the taint of money during the .com. We raised $75 million and never got to market. I had a $10 million marketing budget. We didn't have a product. I don't know what I did with the $10 million. I spent it, that I do know. And then you saw us go from 0 to 165 people, downtown office building in Boston, 2 floors, great, everything you could imagine. And then you saw the other side of the .com coming down. And so I think we got up to 175, and I left at 165. And went to employee number 5 to a small garage startup in financial services. He wanted me to be a sales guy. I did not want to be a sales guy, so I told him I had to at least do marketing. And so my title was Director of Sales and Marketing when I went over there. Anyway, that company got acquired by Jack Henry, who's one of the largest financial services companies. And my office was, those receptions where like you go into a medical office and you got to open the window and have your appointment and all that kind of stuff. I was behind that. That was my office. So, but that company had a product, delivered value, got to market, and sold, and had a success. And it was just really interesting. Those back-to-back experiences were really interesting to see, are you good stewards of money? Do you spend it properly? Do you attack the customer problem? Do you attack the market? And he was a great mentor for me, just seeing how he built it, and it was a tremendous experience. But just to see those back-to-back during the sort of .com run was a really valuable experience. But back to the point of where I was going, I didn't think I'd be in financial services. We did ATM business management for ISOs, and then we looked at the market and we said, hey, geez, banks could use something of this. And then we went to banks and sold that, and that's where we ended up with Jack Henry. So only advice I ever had for young people is just start doing something, get out and figure it out. Doesn't matter. Like, start delivering value, start doing something, and it'll...
Use a Nike slogan.
Just do it. It will lead you someplace.
Every entrepreneur in North Carolina knows that they need to enter the Boston market somehow. So if you had advice for people in the room who, once they get their product to a certain point, want to start selling in the Boston market, what are 3 things that you would advise them to do on how to break into the Boston market? Are there must-attend events, conferences, or associations that you would advise them?
Yeah, listen, one of the nice things was BOS coming down here and moving down to Raleigh with Bill's help. That was a huge one. Mass TLC was a great tech resource up there for a lot of software companies. It'd be hard for me to tell you that I haven't been in retail. Everything I've ever sold for the longest period has been sort of market agnostic, or at least U.S. agnostic, right? Just sell across to enterprises. I've been predominantly a B2B SaaS guy for most of my career. But I do think, one of the things that I like about right, there's New York and San Fran that are just their own beasts. Mm-hmm. And then there's like the Boston, Atlanta, Chicago's that sort of clump together. And they provide great resources. I think that's what is really exciting when I've come down here and sort of seen all that's down here. Raleigh, Charlotte, what you've done in Wilmington, I think is really interesting. There are a lot of resources in every market that I think go, generally speaking, untapped by a lot of the community until it's too late sometimes. Right after there's the first failure, oh, we should try and do this again somehow. But there's a lot of research up in Boston, like POS and MSTLC.
Okay. In the podcast with Kevin Mosley, you said you eventually listened to the market, and the market, your prospects and your clients were telling you, yeah, we like your product, but there's this bigger problem over here that no one is addressing. Can you talk about finally listening to that little birdie on your shoulder and attacking what was that market? What was that need that the industry had?
Yeah, I'm chuckling because it's so core to what I believe right now. It's really hardened a view that I have, and for anybody who wants to start a business or anybody who's doing it right now, don't build software for you. Don't build a product for you. Build a product for what the market tells you they need. And if you're smart enough to listen to it, and that sounds sort of condescending, I don't mean it to be, but buyers in the market have pain that they will tell you about regularly. You shouldn't chase the pain, but if you abstract the pain to a problem, you will solve it. And so in every stop, what has been influenced has been a almost obsession with what does the customer tell me they need, and how can I abstract that to a bigger problem that it's going to solve and be more applicable? Because you can't chase this one-off problem either. That's a different problem. Like, there's a skill set in listening to pain that a customer gives you or a market gives you and abstracting that to a problem that the general market has. And the mistakes that I've seen, and frankly the mistakes that I've made or been part of, have all come from trying to think that we knew best, that we knew what their problem was better than they knew what their problem was, and sort of doing that without reflecting on it. And this is a little counter to like the Steve Jobs, like I'm just going to go build it and they will come kind of model that Steve Jobs had, but he was brilliant in how he attacked it, but he still saw a bigger problem. It wasn't the fact that like they just told him they didn't need it there. He said they're going to, and saw where the problem was going. That's different than creating your own view of the problem. And so, one of the values I think I tried to bring to CureMint, which was different, right? My wife and I founded a company, had that for 15 years, and so we knew where every skeleton was, and then I came into this other company and I had to find where the skeletons were, and I had to ask what the problems were, and I had to dig a little bit. But I would say the single greatest value I brought to that organization, because they had good people, talented people, a good product, was the ability to focus on what mattered, and in particular, focus on the customers that were telling us this was what they need, not building what we thought they needed. And I think it resulted in what it resulted in.
So let's jump into Saylent. You became an entrepreneur in 2006, selling to banks that you doesn't sound like you like banks very much. So what did Saylent do? Can you tell us what Saylent was?
It's not that I don't like banks. They were fine. They're just slow and not nimble, which is counter to everything I've ever done. So at a high level, we started out as a payment analytics solution. So what
does that mean?
So we read all of the transaction behavior. So I'll liken this back to the company before Saylent. We were reading all these ATM transactions. So when you went to an ATM, you go to a bar or a restaurant, or they're all owned by these ISOs, independent sales organizations. And they had all these terminals, that these terminals were split who paid who, what the commission was, what the rent was, how much cash was in it, what a service cost was. And so we were a business management platform for ATM deployers. We said to ourselves, okay, we were the market leader in that area. And we said, let's go to the banks. They got a bunch of ATMs. Let's go talk to them. So we did. And as we approached banks, what we learned was, to your point earlier, they said, these are fine. They're sort of cost centers. And by the way, whenever you hear that, that just means they don't care about them, essentially. And so there was no investment or no desire to invest in that. But what they kept saying was, hey, but we have all these debit cards and credit cards that we make a ton of money on and have no idea how anybody uses it. All right. So they kept saying it. So classic sort of entrepreneur story. My wife and I tell this story all the time. I was in a bar in Vegas.
There we go.
That's how it all starts. At a conference, and I was...
The bar napkin business.
It was exactly what it was. I had a customer in front of me. I pulled out a napkin. I said, here's what I think you need. This is everything you've been telling me. Here's what I think the platform should do. What do you think? He said, we need that. I said, okay, do other people need that? He said, I think so. I said, all right. So I talked to a couple other customers that we sold, good friends of mine. They were our first 2 customers. I went back, flew in. I think I got there like you would if you leave at 9 a.m. on Vegas. You end up in Boston around 10 p.m. Wife goes to bed about 9. So I went and woke her up and I said, listen, I think we got something. She's like, what's going on right now? So, and then she's like, can we talk about this over coffee? I said, yeah, we probably could. So we talked about it over coffee. And that was the genesis of this. So we read all of the transaction data that you would perform on your cards, and we spit it back to them with all the ability to segment by user profile, by all this information, things that you would think your bank has, right? Because you see it, you go in your online banking, you say, oh, all these transactions. Guess what? They use Excel like everybody else in the world when they don't have a product, right? And so we built a product to analyze and segment their behavior. To the point that I mentioned earlier, I had a whole idea of what the system was going to be. And I was talking to, it was Michael earlier, actually. We were talking about big vision of what was going to be, right? I had this big vision of what was going to be. There were 5 modules. We were going to layer this whole shit together and everything was going to work. And we started with the first 2. We said, this is what it's going to be. And convinced her, I'll tell you the other story in a second, but convinced her that we're going to go do that, which, by the way, if you're going to start something, be sure to get your spouse on board. And so we went after it hard, and I built a PowerPoint and said, this is what we're going to build. I sold 2 people without ever having a product. I said, we're going to go build this. We built it, and then just kept going from there. So by the end of it, we started, everybody remember 06, big words that you'd hear were big data, Hadoop, visualization. That was 2006 to 2010. Well before ML, well before what is today AI and LLMs, and now whatever else the next buzzword will be, because they're just constant evolution of how that's going to go. Saylent was born, and the end of it, we started in that payment analytics system. By the end of it, we were a customer engagement and MarTech platform. We essentially read all the data that the bank would have, payment activity, core behavior, which is your balances and all the ACH activity and bill pays, and we tried to interpret and group based on your behavior to identify need, risk, or opportunity in the relationship, and then market to them so that they could change that behavior before it occurred. That was what Saylent became.
I believe you said 3 consecutive Inc. 5000 rankings. How does that feel when you get that first trophy, that first validation of, well, somebody gives a damn because I just got an award, right?
You're underselling. We were 6th time.
I'm sorry.
No. No, the award.
Just the first time. How does that feel the first time?
You know what felt better? It was great. I mean, I don't want to say it was great, but the proudest I was ever about Saylent was the first contract sold.
Yep.
That was it. When you get somebody to sign something, and you see the check, we got a $30,000 check, it wasn't a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot of money, but not in an enterprise sale, right? But it's $30,000, and you got that. I said, damn, we did it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Then I realized that, like, well, damn, we got to do it now. So that was the proudest moment. The second proudest moment was the exit, but only because I think it was one of the few instances, and now been part of 4 transactions from 4 very different perspectives. It's hard to get it where everybody feels good about it. Usually somebody feels bad somehow, right? Somebody's getting screwed, somebody's not getting paid out, somebody's getting fired, something's happening. And I just felt like when we exited Saylent, there were a lot of really good, happy perspectives.
Yep. Good. In the podcast, you talked about a transition from direct sales to a sales channel.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about why you made that move and maybe explain to the entrepreneurs what that means, a sales channel? What does that mean? We were going, because the SaaS model hadn't quite really adapted back then. I mean, it was coming, but we had not fully done it. So we were going to market with a direct license and maintenance model, which was pretty common back then. It was how we raised up the company before. And then 2008 happened. And 2008 was so different from COVID selling to banks because, financial crisis.
I mean, it wasn't whether they wanted to, they couldn't. They had no cash, they had no liquidity. And thankfully, so the quick story, we bootstrapped the business for 15 months. And we raised money March of 2007, first slog of capital.
Just under the deadline.
October was when Lehman went down, October 2007. And so without that capital, we're done. Doesn't matter how good that, doesn't matter anything, right? And so there's a certain amount of luck in all this stuff. But we got that capital and we said to ourselves, okay, it got to this point, we had a couple of very interested larger groups that we were selling to that were our distribution angle into it. And so in the world, there was at the time 12, 16,000 banks, something like that, banks or credit unions. And there were probably 20 payment processors, MasterCard, TSYS, FIS, Fiserv, you name it, you go down the run, that all had the transaction data that we needed to provide to the banks. And so we said to ourselves, we have got to scale this thing up, make it multi-tenant, go into the SaaS model. We played the classic white label powered by Saylent, and we tucked ourselves as close as we could to all of those payment processors so that we could have a pre-integrated solution so that we went to the bank, they were signing up for X hundred, X $1,000 a month instead of any sort of major capital outlay. Because it was still a revenue driver and they still needed it, but without that pivot, and I shouldn't say that, without that evolution of the business, probably not a pivot, but without that evolution of the business, we would not have survived, just couldn't have. And so we tucked close to them for 2 years, survived, actually grew during that time. Yeah. And then we started introducing products on top of that and started getting to where we had to exit.
So in that podcast, you also say you were very careful not to raise too much money because you would be upside down. Can you explain to the first-time founders in this audience what that upside down concept means?
Yeah, at a high level, your company's not worth what you've taken in, and so then you owe too much money, right? You're out too far, you're out of skis. Not that I've differed from that position, but being down here is it's been eye-opening. This market, and not just Wilmington, this market doesn't have enough capital. And they don't use capital as effectively as I think that we should. I underfunded the business on an opportunity, and it cost us. We did not execute that opportunity as we should have because we didn't have enough capital, because I got worried about the things that founders get worried about, which is like dilution. Hey, we might sell, this might happen. It didn't cost us, but it could have. And so that's been a big learning for me. But we were very capital efficient. We raised $6.5 million over, I think we raised money over the first, call it 7 years of the business, and then operated on our own capabilities, basically 8 to 15, through some combination of either growth or debt. We used debt pretty well, I think. But that was a big concern about, the quick backstory to that. We were launching a product that we had that was tucked into one of our partners. It was essentially a rewards checking model. It was this ability for the bank to read all the core activity and then lever the relationship and the behaviors they wanted in the relationship by trading interest or cash on the account. And so, quick example, if you use your debit card 20 times, you get direct deposit and you have 1 ACH a month, we'll give you a higher interest rate. That was the basic concept of that. We had a competitor out in the market that was selling direct. We were selling through one partner, and so the model was, well, we have a better mousetrap. Let's take that out of this direct environment and sell it universally. We thought we needed $4 to $5 million. Worst thing that ever happened, which for all, this may or may not happen in your situations, but worst thing that ever happened was somebody right before lobbed a call and said, hey, we're really interested in what you're doing. We'd love to talk to you, and we'd like to pursue maybe buying the business. And we're like, we got really excited about that, of course. But we're knee deep in a cap raise. And so the cap raise, they had thrown a number around, like, call it, I don't know, $25, $30 million. We were raising it at maybe 20 million. We said to ourselves, well, we can't raise it at 20 million if we're going to do a 30 million. Like, they're going to see that, they're not going to buy it, blah, blah, blah. So we got cute. Never get cute with your cap table. just so we don't get cute. Anytime I've ever put a funky term in a term sheet, it's come back and bit me in the ass so hard every single time. So anyway, that's me on my soapbox. So we instead of taking 4, we took 2. We had to promise the new investor a return if we did sell, so that we could maintain control of the business, and the existing investors could control the exit. And turns out, to no surprise, they weren't all that interested in buying us for $30 million. So we had nothing except $2 million on bad terms that we couldn't never get out. We got out from underneath it. But at the end of the day, we took the $2 million. It had enough to get us to where we needed if everything goes right. But as evidence, not everything goes right. And we didn't have enough to get it out in a direct market, which was another learning. So it's like, when you have somebody willing to take the money, a successful outcome will overcome any dilution concern that you have. Take the money you need to accomplish what you got to accomplish.
All right, and you said the investment capital was for growth, not profitability. Can you explain to the first-time founders what that means as well?
Yeah, it's Saylent went through an interesting time where in the beginning of our growth, in the beginning of our life, the only thing that mattered to investors was growth. And if you go back in time, at the end of our life, the only thing that mattered to investors was reasonable growth at profitable means. And that remains in today's market, I think. There's a lot greater concern on being profitable, running within your means, not getting over your skis, all that good stuff. So we started getting to a point of just making sure that as we were taking capital, we were being good stewards of it. We were reasonably capital efficient. Our model suggested we were going through all these partners, most of them. And so we could do it in a way that wasn't going to burn a ton of cash. So it's just a matter of, when you don't have revenue, you're obviously going to take capital to grow and to prove product market fit and to do all that kind of stuff. But you can't, it's not a growth at all cost market today. So you've got to be pretty cognizant on getting to profitability.
Story about the acquisition of Saylent?
There's a more...
Besides the check, holding the check, I guess, after that many years of...
I think when I went, there's a couple fun. I went down to tell Sharon that we have a deal on the table, because we had a deal that we were going to accept, and then this partner came in later, and it was more. And Sharon's like, get the F out of here. They're not, I'm like, no, listen, there's some risk, but I'm like, we got to sort of go. I think it's worthwhile. So it was fun having that discussion. It was really, I always tell founders this, when you get a term sheet, doesn't matter what stage, when you get a term sheet, I'm a basketball player, so here's how I think about it. Win or lose, you get 24 hours to mope in your sadness or celebrate your win. Take your 24 hours and celebrate. Like, enjoy it, and then get back to work. Forget about it ever happened.
24 hours.
24 hours, man. That's all you got. Until you can get to the exit, because there's a lot of roller coasters in the exit process. And so, but everything's a milestone. So somebody puts a term sheet in front of you for a reasonable amount and you think it's real, like, sign it and celebrate it. Go out to dinner, have a nice glass of wine, right? And then get back to work.
How's that sound, Daniel?
Don't let it hang. The more enjoyable one, the funnier one, was I got to be careful because this is CureMint, but I got to be careful about the discussion. But I was having a discussion at the end. We were negotiating the actual documents Thursday before the Friday we were about to close, which is insane, by the way, as Anna will attest to. You should not be mucking with documents the day you're going to sign them. But they had the gall to say to me, they're like, oh, we're not going to accept these customers because we're in deep pricing negotiations with them, because we were going to get a cut on, if they did close after the deal, we would get some percentage of that. And I said, okay. It's like 11:30 at night. I'm exhausted. All I want to do is go to bed and sign this thing. And he comes back and he's like, we're deep. Fine, listen, I'm a reasonable person. You show me any proof that you're in deep price. They said yes, they sent an email, they did whatever. I'll acquiesce, we'll remove my thing, I'll call it a day. He sends me two things. One was a text that said, hey, I heard our teams are engaged. That was it. That was deep pricing negotiations. The second one, which was more enjoyable, he said there was a mid-level buyer, and I knew this because I was engaged with her. There's a mid-level buyer that essentially sent an email that he captioned to me and said, what was the exact words? Is this monthly pricing or not? And that was it. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. Yeah. So I just, there's ups and downs and hills and valleys in every deal, and you just got to do your best to stay through it.
And then the two of you had the brilliant idea of moving to North Carolina and living in the Raleigh area. And what brought you into the new company called CureMint?
Good old Tim. Tim McLaughlin, the co-founders. I had completely disconnected from the business world for about 15 months after the sale of Saylent. It was long. You guys all know it. Anybody who's found it, it takes a lot out of you. And it should. You put everything into it. When we ultimately got to the point of saying, okay, we're done, 15 minutes I walked away, I didn't do anything. I woke up in Raleigh. We had been here for 9 months, right? We moved in July, sold July 2020, sold the company April 21st. They shut off my email. We were done. So took a year off, came back that next fall now, so whatever that is, September of 23, maybe, no, 22. And I knew nobody here. I mean, we don't have family down here, so it was just us and the friends that we had met. And I just felt like, okay, I gotta meet some people. And so I did a bunch of reverse networking. Fred Hutchinson was one of my first calls, introduced me to a bunch of other people. I met co-founders, met Bull City, met Lister, met everybody but Wiley, actually, which is kind of funny. And so I met a lot of these people, and I met Jay Bigelow, who started to get me into CED, and I did 2 Grow mentor programs. And here's the one thing I'll tell, and I'll promise anybody in this room, you can take me up on it. I love this stuff. I love being an entrepreneur. I love having coffee. I love listening. This stuff fills my cup, right, from my perspective. There are so many people that helped us be successful that to not turn it around and pay it back is selfish and not what I'm interested in, right? Like, I love this stuff. So anybody in this room that ever wants to talk or has a question, reach out to me, and I promise you I'll get you time. But through that, I got the itch to get back in. Here's the other thing I'll tell you. There's a lot of people who said, because when you do have an exit, you can leverage that in some way. You can be successful. And so everybody said, well, why don't you just start another thing? And the simple truth of it is I don't have an idea enough, I'm passionate about enough to go through the pain. Because I know exactly what I'm about to go through. When you do it the first time, you have no idea. So everything's great. It's like when you're a parent, right? I don't know what the kid's like, right? And I think God tricks us because you forget all the things about when they're infants and you're like, oh, I remember that. That was hard, right? Like, I knew it. So there was nothing I wanted to do to start it on my own, but I wanted to help people. And so Tim and the founder of CureMint, I think the founder had sort of come to a point where he threw his hands up. I mean, that's sort of how I think about it. And I don't want to say he was dejected with what it is, but I think he felt like he had tried all of the angles he could. And he, because it's hard to go in and take over somebody's baby. It really is. There's a lot there. And I always said I never wanted to join a toxic sort of environment. And if that CEO or founder's around it makes it hard. Right. And so Tim and Brandon had talked, and Brandon had the idea, said, I think I could be more valuable to business doing something else rather than all the stuff in the CEO chair. And so we worked together, and we consulted for 4 or 5 months and then took over.
Why, I mean, please tell everyone here what they did and why you went, oh yeah, that's the horse I'm gonna ride.
You might carry the same opinion as my wife. She's like, why are you doing this again? Yeah. What's going on? So they were a procurement platform for dental organizations. In particular, they did what are called DSOs. They are the roll-ups of multiple individual dental practices. The easiest one to tell you is like Aspen or Heartland, those types of people. Rico Bene around here is one of them, right? So PE came into all these dental practices and essentially bought up the individual practices, but they can't own the practices, so they create service organizations over the top of it that is nothing more than an accounting trick. And they control everything about it, but they can't control the practices, except they control the practices. So it's kind of odd. Anyway, so our job was to help them control the practices' buying habits. Again, regulations would tell you can't tell the dentist what to order, but you can only provide so much in a catalog, and then that's all they can buy.
Right.
We were the mechanism with which to do that. And when I came in, they were procurement heavy. They were trying to do some banking thing. And I think we just refocused on, I didn't think procurement had a big enough competitive moat around it, because it's pretty easy to switch. And the other thing is procurement, the whole point of procurement is to actually get the cheaper, so they would switch all the time. And so coming from banking, I tried to get into a more retentive environment. And so we tried to get into the office of the CFO and make them a procure to pay platform. So we would handle everything from the procurement through the payables and invoice reconciliation in some ways similar to how Michael's doing it. And so that was the view, that was the direction, that's what we put in there.
So a few more questions and then we'll open it up to the audiences. Can you talk to us about when the investor writes the check into your company, there now becomes a ticking clock, a sense of urgency to get to an exit. Can you talk about how that works? Is there an actual, flame under the chair kind of thing, or?
Yep, there's a couple things there. The first is, back to the funny story, we received our first check for the deposit while we were on a cruise. By the way, so whatever you time in terms of vacations and wherever you're gonna go, it's always gonna collide with some big event that you've planned that you could never have possibly foreseen. That's exactly what happened. So I'm on the cruise ship, like refreshing my bank account, the company's bank account, to say, did the money show up? Did the money show up? Anyway, it did. So we celebrated. That was a good one.
Did you then go to the casino?
We did.
Okay.
It was good. It was a nice night. That was one of those, again, 24 hours celebrate,
yes,
call it a day.
Yes.
So as soon as you take money, the thing that I remember most from raising money the first time, and we raised it all independently, we didn't hire bankers, we never raised enough to do any of that. One of the investors was very direct, and I appreciated this. It wasn't the investor I went with. But they basically said, listen, I'm worse than your wife because your wife can divorce you, but I can fire you.
Wow.
And so, okay, I got it. So choose your partners wisely, both sides, by the way, marriage and investment, choose them wisely because they were going to be there for you or be with you forever. But as soon as they have it, you need to ask and be very direct with the people you partner with. There's an investment window they have, there's follow-on investment timeframes, and then there's an expectation for them to get paid. Doesn't mean you have to sell, but it does mean they have to get liquid. So that usually, everybody's a little different, but usually it's a 5-year investment horizon. If they're at the end of their 5-year investment horizon, depends on the investor, right? Some get a little pickier, some get a little, hey, we got to put money out there, let's put it out there. So, knowing where and how you time that stuff matters. Understanding how much follow-on they're willing to put with you and have that available to you. So that's an important element to ask. But you take it at the end of your 5-year fund, they're trying to get back to their LPs by 10. Yep. Your horizon's smaller than somebody in year 2 of the fund. And just recognizing all of that matters. I think, I don't want to assume. You can get an early investor liquid without selling the company, but it becomes harder. Mainly because the next investor is then asking the question, are they just trying to dump their stuff on me, right? Like, are they just trying to get out and they're just trying to get paid? So in spirit, you try to run it all the way through and get everybody paid at the time frame. We had an interesting situation. Our lead investor of the first round, Venture Capital Fund of New England was the company, actually got bought by Venture Capital Fund of America. And then we got into like a new fund, and then they bought it back out, and there was like a whole thing there. But there's all this, the point of me saying that was they had to prove and put marks on the value of the business, what the return model was going to look like, how they were going to get paid out there. And I think, and I know I did this, and I've seen other founders do it too, we're almost shy to ask the question, like, what are your expectations? When do we need to get paid on this? What's your exit horizon? How are you going to get out of this? Right? What's a win for you? I was on the board of a company, and I told the CEO, I said, you need to be, through the end of this year, like the operating plan you're putting together is fine, but you need to think about what your exit horizon is, and you need to talk to your investor. Is there capital there, or I have to raise from somebody else? And if you don't ask that question, then you're flying blind into a very, very important part of your business. And so I would just encourage you to be direct, have an open relationship. Usually a lot of the founders make mistakes like they either, it's a delicate balance. You either keep them too far away or bring them too close. They're not good operators, generally speaking. So don't ask them to operate the business.
The investors
are
yes.
Not
good operators.
Generally not.
Right.
They also are not good when you push them out the door and don't talk to them because they want to actually know and be involved, right? And so that's been a learning over my career of just how to operate with investors because you do need to have a very tight ongoing relationship because they are not going anywhere.
How do you get past that bias towards the safer investment into serial entrepreneurs? Because that's really, I would say, one of the top 5 problems we have in North Carolina, and especially this market.
It's a good question. In my head, there's like 3 things. The first is traction solves all. If you show what you're doing and you're showing traction, not just belief, that's meaningful. Investors will follow that a lot. What else would I say? This is another one of those soapbox moments I tell founders now, mainly because I've met a lot of them down here that I think have this trait. It's okay to do something on the side to get something going. Get it. Everybody's got to pay the bills. Everybody's got to do what they have. I've heard from more than a handful of founders, I'm not full-time yet, but as soon as I raise money, I'll go full-time. And I'll just tell you what that sounds like from the investor perspective. I'll believe in it as soon as you believe in it. And it needs to be the other way around. You're not going to do this. This is not for the faint of heart. It's not for those that lack courage. I used to tell people, people nice, especially employees, right, that they like to be complimentary and in some ways in deference. They'd be like, oh, you're so smart for thinking about this idea. You're so smart. No. I was dumb enough to actually try and go do it.
Right.
And you need that, right? My wife, in a 6-month period, she's the one maybe more crazy than I am.
Wait a minute, that's not a very smart.
No, you'll see. She'll know exactly when I say this. In a 6-month window, we built a house, had our first kid. I left a very comfortable corporate job to start a business in 6 months. We started in January. Our first kid was born in July. We moved into the house that we built. That was, by the way, over our skis on a 5/1 ARM interest only. There's a whole different thing. May of that year, right? So that's a lot of crazy. And so I just say that, not that that's what anybody else should do in this room, but I would just say to you, part of what people follow is your belief in the business and your willingness to risk it all to make it successful. And if you're not willing to risk your own livelihood to it, they're not going to, again, there's exceptions to all these rules. There's probably some great idea that can be funded on the side, but that is not the way to go get it.
Yeah.
You got to commit to it, and you got to go make it happen. The serial entrepreneur thing, people blame it on pitches. I think sometimes, I didn't have a good pitch, this person not good in front of something. I'm like, if you just go in and show belief, show passion, show humility, and show traction, you'll get funded. That's my opinion. They're in the business of making money, and they're invested in you as much as they're invested in the idea, and you just got to go own it.
So my last question is, and we'll get to the audience, is what's it like to sell your baby? And that takes 15 months to kind of get over. So what's it like to finally sign that last document and you don't have to go into work at 9 a.m. the next day?
It's very surreal. I was not one of those, this is my baby founders. That's how I refer to it. We had always built the business to be sold. So that was always the intent, right? And so I wanted it to be, I viewed my job as to be the steward of the best that this business could be. I coach a basketball team as well. The way I think about it is, not every business is Uber, not every business is Google, not every business is this. Maximize whatever you have to be the best it can be and let that happen. It was a very surreal moment because when you're a founder and you start something, inherently all of your personal is tied to the business and there's no disconnect, right? All your friends email you at that business, right? My Gmail was not very popular, right? My eWork account had everything there. All my contacts were there. That's what it was. And when that went off and I couldn't access it anymore, like I managed my life off my inbox.
Right.
I mean, in some way. And so I went upstairs in the office because we're all remote at the time. I went out in the office and I'm like, and I couldn't get in. And I vividly, I remember going, there were two moments. This is one at the end and one at the beginning. The one at the end was, I guess that's it. And I went downstairs. I said, they just shut my email off. I don't know what I'm going to do now. And I didn't. I had no idea what I was going to go do. In the beginning, the more surreal moment was, there's great comfort when you're an employee and you look back and you have to fight for some idea. And so I was a sales guy and I'm like, oh, we should give them 3 times liability. I don't know why we're arguing here. Let's get this thing done. Come on. I'm a sales guy, right? And I got the first contract and I was having the same discussions, like, well, we got to put a cap on liability. I need $2 million, not $1 million, whatever the right number was. And And I up in my spare bedroom, and I hear the kids downstairs, and Sharon's there, and we're all just, and I'm like, I asked the lawyer, and I'm like, well, what should we do? And he's like, I don't know, you gotta make a call. I said, I guess I gotta make a call. And so that was another surreal moment on the beginning part of it, where you realize it's all in your head. So.
And now you have a role with Jurrasic Capital.
Yeah, I had a role with Jurrasic for a little bit. It's how I got into the Roobrik board. They have a group of operating advisors. That's just another way for me to stay connected and stay advised. It's super helpful. I'm not a huge, there's been a big movement of life coaches and business coaches and CEO roundtables. I'm not a huge proponent of some of that. But I do find great value in whatever way you find it. I do find great value in seeing the same problem from a different perspective. And if you can put yourself in spots to see that, I think it makes you better operators as well as better people. Like, I just think there's been tons of time when I've been at Jurrasic or seen a problem or seen a pitch where if I'm so close to it, doesn't matter how many times you've been through it, you're close to it. Yeah. And to be able to step back and see it from a different perspective, I think is super valuable. Jurrasic's been great in that respect.
Okay, who has questions from the audience?
Yeah, so you talked about with Saylent that you knew all the skeletons in the closet were, and where the challenges were, and you were looking for them when you got procurement.
Yep.
What was sort of one of the biggest surprises, if you can, without going into too much detail, that you would have thought, holy crap, I would have thought they never would have been in this situation?
That's a great question. Let me ponder that slightly. CureMint had some drag from first. They had a founder group. They bought out one of the founders, brought in another founder, and so they had some of that. But that was transparently exposed. So I knew about that before we got in there. It's definitely a skeleton, but we had known about that. Most of the things were like, why were our financials this way? He had just reclassed the financials, and instead of using the sort of class code in QuickBooks, we just created a whole new set of chart of accounts. And so what that meant was you had one group of financials here, and then you'd go here, and so there'd be this blank line going this way. That was a little new to me. What else? I would say there was nothing really bad that I encountered. And I'm not of the mindset, like, nothing's perfect. And so I never expected it to be. The most interesting learning I had coming into a company that was already functioning, that already had a culture, that already had their own set of experiences, was just how to navigate it internally. I think there were things I did well and things I think I in hindsight could have done better, but I tried very hard not to immediately, gain authority or try and put my stamp on it. Like, it wasn't about me. It was about, like, what did we need to do, and to just try and make everybody buy into what we needed to go do. That was really the most important. So there was nothing. The thing I joked about him all the time was he was an Army guy, and so for a $1 million business, it was over processized, is the way I would describe it. It had a lot of operational stuff that it went, it was just a lot, and we didn't quite. So we had built to be a scale of like a $25 million company, but we were like $1 million. So I was like, this is too heavy for this type of organization, and to try and pick ways to lighten that was a challenge.
More questions, Paul?
Are you able to share kind of where did you end up from a revenue standpoint when you sold, and then where did you become profitable in your journey, and then kind of what
for
level
CureMint?
of profitability?
Saylent would be better.
Saylent, yeah.
Saylent, we got to 10 million, $1.5 million in EBITDA, essentially. COVID was a win for the business. We improved dramatically during that time period. we were doing it before. We were about to exit about 4 years prior, and then had some customer attrition, and we had to. That's another really hard thing. It's like when you get all geared up and you had bankers you're talking to and you're ready to go, this is the time. And then to have to pull that back, it's a little bit like pulling the IPO on a much smaller scale. But we were 10 million. I would say we got profitable. I'd say the last 6 years or so, we were fundamentally break even. It'd go up and down a little bit, but like, plus or minus 100,000 is basically fine, right? We were never dropping $500,000 or $1 million. So I would say we probably got to scale and profitability around the 6 million mark, something like that. For those that maybe I'm speaking down to what's known here, but like the way I think about it is there's a handful of milestones and stages that you should be thinking about. There is, first customer, right? You've got a product, you got out there, you got first customer. There's the $1 million to $2 million mark, which I loosely put at the product market fit level. You've figured out you have something people want to buy. Then I think 10, 25, 50, 100, 250, 500 billion, right? Like those are the basic levels that you walk through. And so I think you should be aware of that. And I think you should also be aware that whatever got you to the first level might not be the thing that gets you to the next level. Whatever gets you there in terms of people may not be. That was always the hardest thing to do. You had great people who got you to a certain level that I had to look you in the face and be like, you're not, I love you, but you're not the person that's capable of getting us to the next level. And those are really hard, honest conversations that frankly, early in my career, I could not have. I would just skirt
Were
it.
you able to help those people find a position in another company that you were aware of, or did it need to be kind of a cold cutoff?
So that's a great question. It was never, we generally never got to the spot we had to let somebody go because of that. What happened was that we had to hire above that person. And that's hard because they don't want it.
Yeah.
And they think that you're not being loyal, and they think that you're not helping them out. And so I'm going to talk about Cheryl now. Like the Cheryl was our VP of engineering. She wanted to be the CTO, or she thought she wanted to be the CTO. And she was an excellent developer. And she didn't want to, I didn't think she could be a CTO. And so you play the game as a startup and you over-title people because it's the best thing you do because you can't pay them, so you over-title them. And then you can't, what do? You're the senior CTO, right? Like that's the problem that then comes. So then you've got to either take them down or you've got to fire them or you've got to just tell them why you hired over them or whatever. So it was very hard. I skirted the issue the first time it happened. And I'm like, and I ultimately went and I tried to involve her into the decision of who we were going to hire. Please help me figure it out. And, and it didn't work. No matter what happened, it didn't work. She left on her own accord. I didn't fire her. I would never have. She left on her own accord. And she came back. And I was happy this happened because I did value her a lot. She came back and she said, I shouldn't have been a CTO. I wasn't ready. But to see that in the moment, there's so few that see that in the moment. It's hard.
Roger, you had a question?
Yes, sir. So this is going to be a bit of a long question. But earlier,
So were Jim's. So
well, earlier when you were talking, you said, let people tell your pain, determine the problem that the market is facing from this pain, and then create a solution to that problem. So as a developer myself, I was really wondering how you were able to keep interest with the companies that you were referring to, I believe was the banks that you were talking to, with testing as well as updating and keeping them interested while you develop the product for them.
So maybe a couple of points that I'll add into that. First is just clarifying what I mean by this. When somebody says they have a pain, usually that manifests it, oddly enough, in a report. Somebody will be like, oh, I need this report. It's got to be in a pie chart, and it's got to have this column, and I need it now, right? That's not the problem, right? That's the pain they feel because that's what they think they want to solve. But if you dig in a little bit, you will notice that really what they're trying to do is, are they going to run out of money, or is this going to be, what's the bigger problem? And so I have come to believe that the ability to listen to somebody's complaint, to pick at it a little bit and not just take it for face value, and to try and abstract it up one layer, maybe two, to understand like really what are they trying to do that they don't know how to give to you, that's the skill. Now to your second piece of the question, how do you keep them interested? That's easy, because once you've figured out what their problem is and you start solving it, they're very interested in that solution. You just don't do two things. Back in the day, before a lot of the current development methodologies that Parker can talk about much more than I can, we were, it used to be all you did was waterfall style development, right? Like you just say, okay, I'm gonna go down and code this thing for a month and a half or 3 years or whatever it is, and then come back out with, oh, look what we've done. Well, by that time, they don't care anymore. There's some other problem that they're doing. So the whole agile iterative development cycle and the ability to get that out in front of them and be confident and vulnerable enough to put it in front of them is what most developers struggle with. They don't want to put their work in front of somebody until it's perfect. And the problem is perfect, then you never get any feedback on the things you were doing. And so perfect becomes this very binary, did you hit it or not, instead of being able to iterate through the process. And so I would just encourage you, don't be closed about it. As hard as that is, showing your work, because developers are their own little beast, right? And but I've always found what developers like most and what fills their tank most is solving a problem that somebody cares about. If you solve a problem that nobody cares about, that's really, really deflating. If you solve something that isn't their problem and they don't use it, that's also really deflating. And if they don't like what you've built, that's super deflating. So just be out in front of it, I would say, and be willing to like hear feedback, and don't get so, because that's the other thing, you might interpret the idea like I'm listening, I'm here, I showed it to them, I'm listening, but you're always selling what you did versus like listening to what their perspective was of what you've done, and that's the shift.
Oh, that was perfect. That was perfect.
Are there any more? Parker?
I appreciate how much you brought your wife into the conversation. I'm so glad that you also are here. I think a lot of, it's really easy for us to see headlines and see really awesome exit stories and all the pieces, and we miss the messy middle. Like we love to hear the origin story, and we love to see people like you inspiring all of us to like go and get it, as you say. Can you speak to, I have been in business with my husband, who is a CPA. Everyone can pray for me on a daily basis. We decided to take over a side hustle while working full-time and parenting 3 kids and navigating cancer. I'm like, this was such a good idea.
Perfect idea.
This is so good.
Brilliant.
Yeah, with you on the crazy things. Can you share a little bit pragmatically, and I'd love for you to speak into this as well, things that you guys put in place where business doesn't become every conversation. I think it's so tempting for that to be the case, especially when you're working together, but also in running a business, what it looks like. I think this whole idea of work-life balance is an absolute myth. I always call it work-life integration. Like, I'm 100% here, so obviously thank God my twins are not running around right now. So can you speak to things that you put in place that worked well for you guys in, my opinion, I don't know that any business is really worth the family, right? So how did you elevate all those things collectively? What are some practices you put in place, or even just headspace that you had to do those things together and still stay in the same room?
If I forget, remind me to just bring up funding of a business.
Okay.
And that'll trigger me on Parker's response. Is there anything you want to add out of the front? I knew that was the response.
I'll just grab beverages later. Real
Sharon's available at the wine shop later for anybody else. I agree with you on the work-life myth. It overtakes you, and it has to. Now, that made it incredibly messy and incredibly difficult. The joke we always have all the time, we worked together for 5 years directly, and then she was 10 years on the board, and we didn't get divorced, right? Like that's the biggest accomplishment out of Saylent that we could have had. Because it's hard, man, you're putting everything in it, like, and it needs it in order to be successful. I think she did a much better job than I did about like, hey, let's not talk about work. I think that worked really well in the beginning. What was harder at the end was I needed an outlet sometimes, and I didn't then want to bring it to the family. And so then it just becomes isolating, just generally speaking. And the CEO is a lonely chair anyway, right? Like it's hard to talk to people. You can't, in case anybody wants to hear this, like your emotions that you show on a daily basis directly affect your team and your family. And like, that's hard. And you walk in one day and you're in a bad mood, guess what all the employees are saying? Why is Tyson in a bad mood? What happened? Did something go wrong? If you react badly to a customer call, like, it builds. So I think by the end of it though, we got really good at being direct with each other about what each of us needed and what we were planning to talk about. Like, so we'd enter conversation, be like, all right, listen, I need about 20 minutes on the business. Can we just talk 20 minutes on the business? Or, hey, I need 20 minutes where you don't talk a damn thing about Saylent right now, right? Give me a day, give me this, give me whatever. And so we got really better at that type of dynamic. I don't know, I'll give you another chance. Anything you want to add into that?
I think making sure that you, your partner, husband, wife, team, you learn how to date each other again. I know that sounds really bizarre, but you need to have that time where you're dating each other outside of your marriage, outside of your work. And it does make a difference. If that makes any sense to anybody in this room that can relate, but
Yeah, I mean, because
taking the time away, whether it's a trip or a night dinner where you're not talking about anything but fun stuff, it makes a big difference.
best thing we ever did, the joke that I tend to say is that we started a business in 06, and in 07, Sharon's like, we should move. I'm like, we just started a business. And we're not moving. And then, of course, then it came into, listen, we can move anywhere you want when we exit the business, right? And who knows if that happens, right? So you just promise these things out in the distant land. And then COVID came, and that was the first thing we did. We made the decision to move in North Carolina on May 1st, and by May 22nd of that same month, we had everything done and we were on our way down. And so it was like that, and I think that helpful. I remembered it. You don't have to remind me. Here's one of the things I do tell people who are about to start. It doesn't matter if you're in it together or not. I'm trying to think if I should say this. I'll say this. So I was part of the GROW program, and I had a company I was mentoring who had been at it for 3 years. And he wasn't getting the traction that he wanted, but he was bleeding his entire family into it. And his wife was being supportive. He was working his tail off. Like there was nobody was doing anything wrong, right? But from the outside in, I looked at him and be like, you don't have anything, right? It's not there yet. And I'm not saying whether it will be or it won't be, but here's the piece of advice I gave to him that may or may not resonate with anybody in this room. I told him to go home. I said, sit down with your wife and have a discussion. And I said, I want you to treat your family as the VC into your company. And I said, I want you to agree to fund the business whatever you can and include the salary you're not going to make, right? How long are you willing to fund into this business? And when the money runs out, do something else. and stop. It's okay to fail. They all fail. Like, I mean, a lot of them at least, right? Like, but the worst thing is this paper cut, like just every month, money's just going out the door and you don't see any return. That's also not good, right? But it's hard to see it if you're in it because you're so damn close to it. And so I was happy to find out that about 6 months later, he stopped the business because it was the right decision, as hard as that is.
I was the CTO of a startup in Boston, and the guy I worked for was the CEO and was 20 years younger than me. But I noticed that he was a chameleon. So he could take one personality for 1 hour, and then the next hour he would be completely different, and then the next hour something else. And he was terrific. The best CEO I've ever worked for. So how do you get ready for that?
How do you get ready as a founder trying to be that type of CEO? Yeah. It's a really interesting.
Or maybe I have it wrong, and maybe you don't see it that way.
I think I understand the premise of what you're saying. I'll tell you how I am, and then I'm going to come back to your question. I tried to be the same person in every single meeting I was ever in, and I tried to learn from it. I tried to grow from it. I was jovial. I'd play ping pong. It's classic. We got the ping pong outside though. We played ping pong. We'd have beer. We had a hot wings contest, and we had all this stuff, right? And I just tried to be my authentic self. Some people don't like my authentic self, and that's okay. And what's different in being the CEO is like you just have to be comfortable that it doesn't matter what you do, somebody's going to think you're doing it wrong. So, like, it's okay. Just believe in it and don't be so damn confident or cocky in what your view is that you don't listen to everybody else. To your direct point, I think it's important to recognize the people that you're talking to and what they need, which I think is probably more in line with what you're saying. Like they would adjust to the moment and the group that they were in to get the most out of that group. And that's honestly, like that's a skill. It's a skill I continue to work on because there's incredible power in being the CEO. And sometimes you actually hurt the company by being your authentic self in an environment that needs the developer to be their authentic self or needs something else. It's not just coming up in these, words that we'd all use. I don't want to get into the diversity thing, but like the words around like caring and, this, that, and the other thing. You want to know what our culture was? Our culture was being comfortable living in the gray, right? Being obsessed with the customer, right? Like those words resonated with me. After that, I changed our whole review process. And I'm like, why are we asking all these questions? Here are the things that I care about. What things do you love that you do? What things do you like that you do? What things that you hate to do? And what is the percentage across all of those? If they're mismatched, if you're doing all the things you hate and nothing you love, you won't be there very long. If you're doing all the things you love and nothing you hate, you're not doing your job. Because every role has all three of those things at a reasonable equilibrium over time. And so all that's to say, it's the hardest thing to figure out when you need to empower somebody else. And I've come to believe that that actually happens naturally, not from any decision point. You hire somebody that's better at you than that in that area, and you let them go do that. And so I put a great deal of attention or belief in talent and the people you bring onto the team. And I would rather have one person just pick numbers, but I would rather one person at 200 than 2 at 100 than 4 at 50, right? Like, give me the person who wants to go do it and believes in what we're doing and let them go do it. And then you don't delegate anything, they just tell you to get out your way. And that's what you ultimately want.
Okay, guys, can we thank you?
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it.
Great.